It's 6:01, so we're going to get started because we got a lot of things to discuss tonight. So first of all, I want to welcome you and thank you for coming, because being here tonight means you're involved, you want to know more, you've got information, you've got feedback, and so we're so happy that we do have a nice turnout tonight. I'm going to start out with some introductions. So I am Tanya Olson. I am the district administrator for the school district. We have a whole team with us here today. I have Tasha Naylor, my director of business services, and Amanda Thompson, my director of teaching and learning. We also have a team with us from EUA and Findorf. And actually, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
I'm Eric Dufek with SIU and Architects.
And I'm Peter Sandin with Findorf. Oh, yeah. We also have Kristen Milsna, who's the head of our communication and education department here with Findorf. And also, they're not here right now, but we also have a pre-construction team that helps with a lot of our estimating and budgeting through these processes.
And we have two members from EUA here, Kit Daly and Andy Lyons, who are on our engagement team.
All right, and lastly, we have three of our school board members here. So we have Ken Eimers, Brianna Meslick, and Andrea Graham here tonight. So thank you also for joining us. All right, so the agenda tonight is that we're going to review a couple of district highlights, go into the background of the facilities planning that has already occurred here in the district, talk about our proposed facility plans, the community survey results that we had acquired from the fall survey, and some next steps. You're going to hear me talk really fast through my part because we want to get to the important part. So I'm going to go here quickly. So our district mission and vision, this was looked at again and examined last spring when we did the district's strategic plan, and still was found to be very relevant to the work that we are doing. We are a district of about 1,600 students, which is about an average-sized school district in the state of Wisconsin. Even though we're average, even to a little bit on a little bit smaller side, at our high school we offer 18 AP courses, which is extraordinary, and over 50 extracurricular activities and clubs. So there is something for everybody in the Lake Mills area school district. And as you've seen, we're definitely starting to grow. Points of pride up here. Lots of things. I could probably have 2 more slides of our points of pride, but our teachers are really rocking it. What they do with students is extraordinary, and our students continue to excel. Also, very committed to financial stewardship. If you look at that graph, Lake Mills continues to have the lowest mill rate in the surrounding districts. We also have the lowest mill rate in our capital conference, which our districts are exact same size. That tax rate has continued to decrease by over 20% since 2016. And lastly, in the fall, we were able to refinance some of the current referendum debt. We were luckily able to lock in a lower interest rate when interest rates are still low, which is going to save us $724,000 in future interest payments. And lastly, as I mentioned last April and May, we had an all-call out to the community and had a cross-section of people come in and help us develop our strategic plan. We're working through the first year of that, but this is really what sets our goals. Everything we do goes back to, is this part of our strategic plan? And as you can see in that last square, aligning resources to needs, this is what that portion of the strategic plan is all about, is our financial resources, our resources of students, and how does that align with our needs, and how can we proactively approach that? All right, I'm gonna have you turn and talk with your neighbors. You can write it down on a piece of paper. Take 1 minute about what you are most proud of. I'd like you to write it down or chat with the neighbor.
Tanya?
Yes.
What's our current debt load?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Sorry.
I could probably touch base, or I could have Tasha touch base
We're
with
going to grab that as a
you
question. Megan's gonna
later. That's a good question.
What are you most proud of? I thought you were going to answer for our table right away.
Okay, as you are jotting down those notes of what you're most proud of, we're going to come back to that a little later. But I'm going to keep going. Like I said, we want to get to the good stuff. So facilities planning background. This does not happen in a vacuum. We have a lot of partners that have worked with us and will continue to work with us. And they have worked with us over the past different projects. EUA has been a partner for at least the last 12 years here in the district, going back to working here on the new elementary site. We currently are working with Findorf as our construction management team. That is a newer partner. And then R.W. Baird is our financial advisor. That is who we do work with to plan out on the future and look at opportunities to save money, refinance debt, and then any other financial advice we need in the district. MD Roffers was the company that worked with us on the enrollment projections now twice. And then School Perceptions works with us when you see those community surveys come out. I know since I've been here, we've sent up two, one on the facilities planning last fall, and the previous fall, we talked about a community climate survey and got feedback off of that. That first climate survey, actually, that information was used when we did the strategic planning sessions. All right, this I always think is interesting. Going back to what has the district done in the past, going back to Charlie's question about the debt load. So back in 2008, the middle school referendum was passed. There was some deferred maintenance items, some electrical wiring that needed to be upgraded, a lot of safety issues. So that was the first project that was tackled in the district to get that building just into compliance. You can see from there on the bottom side of that the district started planning. They put into place a long-range facilities plan, started studying the need for a new elementary school, which then subsequently moved into a referendum for the building that you're in right now in 2012. That building then opened in 2014. Immediately afterwards, the board started looking at the high school facility study, doing enrollment projections, and updating the long-range facilities plan through the years, which led to the 2018 high school referendum for the additions for the CTE wings, the library media center, and the new football field. That project was completed in 2020, and then immediately after, according to the long-range facilities plan, this conversation was already on that plan back then. So as I started in the district, I approached the board and said, I see in the long-range facilities plan, we have possible referendum in April of 2022 for a new 4K1 school, and we started then working through those plans, and then we will explain that a little bit more with our plan for today. Along with that, then, we did update our enrollment projections, started looking at it. It ended up being an intermediate school facility study. We were engaging the staff and community through the survey, and then we've also been working with the city of Lake Mills as much as possible, especially around planning in that site. The Department of Transportation, because that site is located on Highway 89, and started conducting soil analysis and traffic study just to be able to prepare for any potential costs. All right, so that's my quick explanation there, and I'm going to hand the mic off to Amanda.
All right, I'm going to go over some of our program offerings that we have here in the school district. And the reason for this is as we go through this presentation, you'll hear some of these terms along the way, so we just want to make sure that we're clear about what we're talking about. As a public school, we offer kindergarten through 12th grade programming, typical courses like reading, writing, math, but then also, as you heard in our high school, our CTEs, or our technology and engineering courses, food courses, are also part of that programming. Early Childhood is a program that is for our 3-year-old students who have special needs, so an individualized education plan, and they receive their services in a preschool setting that is inclusive with typically developing peers. For a long time, that program was in conjunction to Johnson Creek School District, Recently, this is our first year that we have that program here in the school district, so our students don't have to have transitions from one set of teachers and resources in Johnson Creek and then coming here to the Lake Mills School District with new teachers and peers. So it's been a very successful year having that program here. It's really great for not only the students but also the parents, so families don't have to have multiple transitions of service providers. Our Head Start program is not run through our school district, but we are partners with Head Start through Jefferson County, and that is a program that is federally funded for low-income families that are eligible, and that provides preschool experience for 3- and 4-year-olds. 4-year-old kindergarten is a program that we've offered here in Lake Mills for the past 20 years. It has been a very successful program. It first started as a community-based program within community providers, but always with our staff members. Recently, we have seen a successful transition of having 4K here in the school building to have those service providers, our school counselors, special education services at the ready for our students in 4K to have a very successful start to school and to have all the resources that they need within the school building. Before and after school care is provided by our recreation department, and that's for families to be able to drop off their students before school starts for care and later into the afternoon and evening hours after school. Something that we would like to provide would be wraparound care. So for our 4-year-old kindergartners who are here for half days to help out families that are working to have childcare provided on the opposite end of 4K.
So from a capacity standpoint, you're going to hear me talk a lot about capacity tonight. And as a prelude to that capacity conversation, I want to kind of direct your attention to the yellow box that talks about the students per class. So in 2010, when we started doing the planning for the elementary school, that elementary school was planned at a 600 student capacity with 24 students per classroom. So 24 students, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. That's how that capacity was created. When we started this next initiative, we asked the school district, okay, we're going to recalculate capacity. We want to make sure that we're using factual information to move forward. How many students per classroom are we calculating for? And the numbers that you see on the right-hand side are an adjustment from what we had done back in 2010. So you're looking at the 4K through K, 18 students, 1 through 2, 20 students, and 3 through 5, 22 students. That's a drop from 24 students per classroom. So when we talk about capacity, we're going to be talking about the elementary school capacity decreasing. It's decreasing because the number of students per classroom is decreasing. So those are directly related to each other when we talk about capacity.
All right, so I want to talk about class sizes and why that's important and how it's changed over time. When we planned for this elementary school, I had just had my first child. He is going to be turning 11 next week. 11 years ago, our society was very different than it is today. Things have changed dramatically. The societal changes of families that need additional support. We have a poverty level in Lake Mills that is very different today than it was 11 years ago. We also have emerging technology coming out that we are utilizing with our students, but that also has an impact on our families as well. And then not to mention the pandemic. We've had our students, those 4-year-olds coming through that have been living through a pandemic and how that has impacted them socially and emotionally and how we're reacting to some of those needs. With all of that though, teachers are expected to do a lot and they're really at the forefront of making sure that our students are graduating college and career ready, and that starts right away at 4-year-old and 5-year-old kindergarten. We want to make sure that our students have what they need in reading, writing, and math, that they know how to share and take turns, but also how to regulate their emotions when things get tough. If you think of 4 and 5-year-olds, if things aren't going their way, sometimes there are temper tantrums that happen, and we want to make sure that those are minimized and that kids have the coping skills that they need. So teachers are teaching all of these things. They are also sometimes doing some of the health needs of students, Band-Aids, ice packs. And what we've also learned in the last couple of years is we want to have enough space within our classrooms to separate students so that we're not sharing as many germs as tightly packed classrooms of the past. So with all of that said, we want to be responsive to all of those needs of our students, and we also want to be responsive to the crisis in education right now of a teacher shortage. We want the best possible teachers in our classrooms for our students. We want to make sure that this is a healthy environment for our teachers to be teaching in so that we can retain them and make sure that they're here year after year providing excellent education for all of our students so that our kids can go off into society being productive members and giving back to our community. So, kind of to recap all of that, the reasons why the smaller classroom sizes are in place are to create better student and teacher interactions, to increase participation and engagement, improve student behavior, help identify early intervention needs, and improve teacher morale.
So this chart, I believe, was provided in a mailer district-wide, and I want to take some time to kind of bring it to life and explain what it shows. So we're talking about just the elementary enrollment district-wide, and the capacity of this school as designed for the 2012 occupancy was a capacity of 600 students. And again, it was based on 24 students per classroom. So there are a fixed number of classrooms within the school. If you drop the number of students within those classrooms from 24 to 18 to 22 per room, the capacity of the school drops. So the capacity went from 600 students down to 508 based on the number of students per classroom adjustment. Now, I want to make sure that that makes sense to everyone, because that is kind of the fundamental reason for calculating capacity in a district. You want to make sure that the numbers are accurate and factual. Yes? Because the capacity of the school is 600. The bar charts below show what the enrollment is. So the capacity is kind of a fixed line, either 600 prior or 508 now. And then what we're showing here are the enrollment numbers. So if we look at 21, 22, where we are currently, the enrollment of the elementary school is 582 students. The capacity of the school is 508 students. So what we're showing with this graph is that not only is the existing building over capacity, but as we look at those enrollment projections over time, it just continues to get worse. So at the end of these enrollment projections, at 2030, 31, we're showing 665 students based on the enrollment projections that MD Roffers and Associates calculated for the district. Something about those enrollment projections. Those enrollment projections are based on developable land in the community, what type of developments would be going on that land, and the number of students that would be coming into the district based on those types of homes going in, whether it's apartments or single-family residential. It also includes the type of turnover for existing homes within the district. So as families age out and sell their homes, what are those price points of the homes, what types of families are purchasing those homes, and how many students would be coming in based on those price points of residences. So the enrollment projection, that methodology that's used to create those enrollment projections, is a pretty accurate way to see what the future of a community will look like, especially for a community like Lake Mills, which is a growing community with developable land. When we work with school districts that don't have developable land, those projections are calculated a different way. So the next slide. So I'm a big believer in having transparent information. This is a chart that from an architectural perspective, this explains what the district is going to look like not only now, but in the future. And it starts to tell a story about what happens with each of the individual schools. So what this chart is showing is what if nothing was done. It's the do-nothing situation. So across the top, we're showing 2020-21, which was when the enrollment projections were first created, all the way through 25-36. So those are, every school year. And then what it shows is the enrollment projection for each of the schools. So this is the elementary school, this is the middle school, and this is the high school. The top number in each of those rows is the enrollment projection based on what MD Roffers is calculating. And then the bottom number is the capacity of that school. So at the elementary level, the reason that these are red is that those numbers are over capacity. Elementary school capacity of 508, and if we look at this year, 2021, 2022, the enrollment at 582. Over capacity, that's why it's red. And it continues to be over capacity through those enrollment projections. At the middle school, those numbers are green. That means that it's under capacity. As we move through time, you'll see that those transition to yellow. That means the building is within capacity. What do I mean within capacity? Well, it's a little bit under and it's a little bit over. So that's within capacity by our definition. But if you notice, toward the end of those enrollment projections, it turns red. So this chart is telling us that not only do we need to create a solution at the elementary level for enrollment, but we also need to create a solution at the middle school which alleviates some of that enrollment growth over time.
What is the time period that they have there?
That 2035, 36.
Okay, so that's maybe another one of the things that weighs how far out in the future you're trying to solve.
Right. So enrollment projections are, it's kind of like telling a weather forecast. A weather forecast is accurate 7 days out, maybe 10 days out, 2 weeks out, it gets a little fuzzy. So enrollment projections from MD Roffers typically go out about 15 years, and then beyond that, it's not really useful to calculate further than that. There was another question?
Yeah, like in the middle school, it says 488 capacity, 75%. Is the 488 75% of capacity?
So that's a good question. When we calculate capacity, depending on the type of school, elementary students typically move from a classroom to an art room, and then their classroom is empty while they're in an art room. So when we talk about capacity, you take a capacity of the school and then you multiply it by 90%, which creates the 508. At a middle school and a high school, it's calculated a little differently because when students leave their classrooms, another group of students come into those classrooms. So fundamentally, those buildings are a little less utilized because of those transitions. So at the middle school, it's calculated by 75% based on a block schedule, and at the high school, it's 80% of the capacity. So those numbers that you see, 508, 488, and 600, that's after that utilization calculation. That is way too deep for most of this audience, but there is reasoning behind the way that schools are calculated. Okay, so the big takeaway from this is the the high school, that addition that was done recently for those classrooms, you're good. You're good as far as the 600 student capacity and the 524 students projected in that 2035-36. But there needs to be something happening at that elementary and middle school level. Next slide. There may be I don't actually have an answer. If there are more questions about this, should I answer those after? Okay. Okay, so the top line of this chart is showing what the current conditions are, right? So currently, you've got an elementary school, you've got a middle school, you've got a high school, and then you have 2 facilities where students are housed. What we're proposing is a 4th building being included within the district. So the elementary school, which is currently 4K through 4, some 4K students, would transition to all of the 4K through 2nd grade. So to alleviate the capacity pressure at the elementary school, the 3rd and 4th grade would move into the new, what we're calling an intermediate school. And to relieve the pressure that's eventually going to happen at the middle school, what we're proposing is that the 5th grade would be moved out of the middle school and into that new intermediate school. So you'd essentially have like a lower level elementary and an upper level elementary school within the district. The middle school would transition to 6-8, and the high school would remain 9-12. You know, thinking back to when we designed this elementary school, for those of you that maybe didn't know, there was an elementary school on this site. It was Prospect Elementary. It had 3 classrooms per grade, and this building was created as a replacement of that school. This is designed for 5 classrooms per grade. What we're talking about in this future plan is that the elementary school would have 7 classrooms per grade, and the same thing with the intermediate school, 7 classrooms per grade, with the option to create additions to that building in the future. Right now, this building is on a small site. It's only 9 acres. It should be 15 acres for the size of the school. It can't take additions. It can't take an addition the size that you need for your future growth in the school district.
When you make that kind of a statement, are you also thinking about the practice of picking up all the kids? I mean, I feel like that's a big change from when I attended at this prospect school.
Yep.
But I've also observed with friends and other new schools that have been built, and especially if it's a suburban clientele, like ours is becoming, somehow someone has to pick up all the young kids.
Yep.
Construct these elaborate runways. And it seems like that wasn't taken into account real well when this one was built. And I feel like that's one of the big tensions between the new site. There's plenty of space there, but then you're also, you know, essentially assuming that a large number of kids will need to be picked up on the bus. And so I feel like a lot of this to be, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead, but part of what I came tonight was to find out what's new, and I feel like you guys, there's a good case that you need more capacity somewhere in that continuum of elementary and middle school. What people seem to be looking for is a compelling case of you have exactly the right grades in the right location, and that it isn't that intuitive.
Right, and you are getting a little ahead of yourself, but we will get to that part later in the presentation. What some of you should be asking is, well, Eric, you've shown us a chart of what happens if the district does nothing. What does the chart say if these projects are put in place? And that's what this chart shows. So similar to what we talked about before, you know, this is today. This is the existing elementary school being over capacity, where the intermediate school doesn't exist yet, and the existing middle school is currently under capacity. So if we look at the 2025-26, then we look at 2030-31, and then 2035-36, you'll see the charts changing colors. So when this building would potentially be occupied, the intermediate school what happens within the district? Well, the elementary school would be have an enrollment for 4K through 2 at 386 students based on the enrollment projections for those grades. The capacity of the school would be 463. So why is it 463 versus 508? Well, you have more kindergarten classrooms, you have more 4K classrooms, and those classrooms have fewer students per classroom. So when you talk about the capacity, we said that the capacity is based on how many students are actually in each of those classrooms. Each time you reduce the number of students in a classroom, then multiply it by the number of those classrooms, that number is naturally going to get lower. So if this option would go into effect, the 4K through 2 building, this building, would then have a capacity of 463 students. But that 463 students serves 2025, it serves 2030, and then you can see it starts to get within capacity in 2035, 36. So what does the solution that we're proposing, what does it do to satisfy that potential enrollment increase later at the end of these enrollment projections? And we'll talk about that when we get to the site plan. You'll see the proposed school, the 3 through 5, enrollment is all in green. That means that it remains under capacity. That school would be designed for 455 students, and it would have, at the end of the enrollment projections, a enrollment of 393 students. The 6-8, by again pulling that 5th grade out of that building, you can see that the capacity is at 488, and at the end of the enrollment projections, that building continues to stay under capacity.
Before you move away from
This slide, yep.
well, I can't take a question. Dealing with capacity. So we're talking about the building being below capacity because we've changed the standards for that capacity.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a discussable point to begin with. The other is, as you're projecting, because from my understanding, we're also seeing growth in homeschooling and in enrollment in the private schools, is that being worked into your projections that some of that enrollment is moving? So I guess the question would be, is that consideration part of your projections?
So they're not my projections. The school district hired a consultant, a different consultant to create those enrollment projections, right? And those enrollment projections are based on the same ratio of students that are currently doing those other services as today. So that they're not increased, they're not decreased. They're kind of consistently projected out through time.
I guess the only thing I would add to that is, I mean, right, I take your case in point. And just a reminder, we still have 2 sections of 4K that are off-site. So regardless, even if we did, our class sizes right now are about 22 across the board. So even with that, we still have, we're still renting space over at the Methodist Church. So we don't have any space to bring that other section of 4K in. So just even if we did change capacity at all, we're still utilizing every square inch of space here. So I just wanted to add that because I know it looks, sometimes that can be a little bit confusing, so.
But I think that's the point, what you just clarified, that there are students off-site.
Right.
I think if we ask that to our community, I think there's a lot of people that are not aware of that, and that might be one way to prefer to keep it. Well,
Right.
I'm sure it's information saved, that does exist.
So they were noting that a lot of people don't still realize that we have 2 4K sections off-site at the Methodist Church, and that is part of the communication that we want to get out. We want to talk about 4K because we do get a lot of questions about why wasn't the school built with 4K in mind? Why are there 4K sections off-site? And we also deal with issues where it is at a church, and even though we try to keep things secular, there are parents that request that our children not attend 4K at a Methodist church, and so then we deal with class sizes as well there. But that's a good point, because I have a list of things that we do want to go in depth in some of the communications that we send out.
So as of did you know, again, this elementary school was designed for 5 classrooms per grade. Currently, there's a 6th classroom that's required for the growth. There's always a bubble that moves through school districts, and the need for a 6th classroom at the elementary level.
So this is just a quick example of some of the decisions that we made this year. So we could have kept the sections to 5. We had 24 kids, which is doable, but I can say, and Aaron can attest for this with being the only principal, that it's like sometimes even getting that 23rd and 24th desk in some of those rooms, if you're familiar with that, is a little bit of a crunch, and especially, we're still dealing with COVID, and we really didn't want kids completely on top of each other. But we're already looking at next year that I think we're going to be forced into that decision for sure in 3rd grade, because we do not have the space to still to have that 6th section of 3rd grade next year, just because we are using a classroom for that extra kindergarten classroom that's not meant to be a classroom. It was actually just a resource room, so we got cubbies and a closet for the kindergartners right now, so they go into, we got curtains in back of that, so it's just not an ideal situation. So they're smaller kids, we could make that work. I can't fit 1st graders into that same environment. There's just not, it's not meant to be a classroom. So we're starting to see some of that already, so we are going back to the 24 kids in a classroom because we don't have space for 6 3rd grade classrooms.
In doing your projections, have you taken into consideration that the Lutheran Elementary School is planning an addition of 4 classrooms to absorb 4K into their system, which will also pull students down the line from our system?
And I'm hoping that doesn't happen. So, I mean, right, because I mean, they are getting ahead of us. They provide a nice service because they're able to offer services that we can't offer. So they are able to offer the wraparound care. It's convenient. What we've seen in the past is there are usually about 10 4K students that attend at St. Paul's, and then when they come to kindergarten, they come back here because that 4K wraparound service is a huge help to families. We could offer that same type of programming if we had the space here, which I think parents wouldn't mind. So yes, we would. I mean, we have a good relationship with St. Paul. Would I prefer to lose our students at St. Paul's? No, but when people do come into a district and they look at facilities and the quality of the facilities, sometimes that is a choice. And I do talk with the principal at St. Paul's a lot. That's not always a choice for families either. St. Paul's is very adamant about the programming they do. They offer a Lutheran school program. I know for a fact they don't want to water down the offerings of what they are offering, and so there are courses that parents have to take to be able to enroll. You need to be a member of the church. So there are things that they're trying to maintain as far as integrity as well. So 4K is a little different, but
That's actually not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. You don't have to be a member of
okay, that's what the principal told me. I've sat there a couple of
You
meetings.
have to pay a
So.
little more. You have to pay more, but you have to pay more if you're not a member, but you can still go if you're not a member.
Okay, so I'm sorry, that's what, when I sat down in meetings, that's what, it's,
I know the perfect.
Okay.
I'll clarify.
Well, I'm glad you could say
sorry.
that.
Well, thanks for clarifying. I'll have to go back and meet with them again about that. So they always tell me, like, don't worry.
What I'm saying is, I think we need to look at this in a broader picture for the future, because believe it or not, this community is on the threshold of really growing, especially with the facility that's going up in Cottage Grove.
Yeah, I appreciate.
I just talked to Phil today,
Well, that doesn't mean we have to
he
follow.
knows what's going on in this town.
We don't have to follow. That doesn't mean we necessarily have to follow.
There is disagreement that
I'm
would
just
be
saying,
a
just because
positive
Cottage
way to
Grove
go.
is doing what it's doing, Lake Mills has its own identity.
I understand that, but we're going to have people that are going to be willing to live.
So part of, I guess, part to Charlie's point is we want to make sure, and we're going to go into the plan, but also making sure that we aren't short-sighted, that there is the ability to add an addition to do some things instead of coming back at you and saying, we're out of space, we need a whole new school at this site. So, right, and it is nice because there's plenty of acreage out there to do the planning. Sheena.
Yeah, I want to discuss on the capacity. So when the school was originally built, the capacity was 624 per class. Obviously, by changing the capacity, you immediately create, looks like creating an artificial inflation. You
Yeah.
immediately create a need for a school. But there's some, I think, skepticism from the community that that's done in the first place and should be addressed. So currently, we're at 570 students. It reads, and our capacity is 580. If you read at 64 students over. Had we been kept at the original capacity of 600, which is the school was built and intended for, we want to reach where we're at now, which is 64 over until 2050. I think it's important to recognize that creating that immediate need has jump-started what was originally supposed to be 10 years farther down the road. And so, and that's, I don't know if that was intentional in the beginning when the school was built, because that land was purchased around the same time, and why, obviously the school district was buying land for fun. That's within those plans. I don't know if it was part of the plan to say, hey, we'll just make it this, and then when we want to build a new one, we'll just quick change the capacity of that school, and then we'll, we need one and have a presentation next to us. So I would like to address that. And the other thing I'd like to address that if you're going to admit to a teacher shortage, but then you're going to create from 4K to 5 by creating 7 classes per grade, you need 14 more classes, 14 more teachers. How do you intend to hire to that facility? We're having a nationwide shortage of teachers and hiring and janitorial and just everything. Unless that's solved, which I don't think we have the capacity to do that as a town, why are we having this conversation?
Right, we wouldn't add those extra staff until they were needed. So, I mean, I think we hire every year, so it's like, yeah, there is a teacher shortage. We still have needs, we still have to fill classroom spaces. So really this plan is projecting to the future. When we do this, are there going to be some empty classrooms in the buildings? Yes. So are we going to fill them with teachers and students right away? No. But it's being that proactive that, that yes, if we do have an influx of students or as population grows, then we would utilize those spaces. So it's trying not to build that new school too small as the perception was here and saying we're already full. The kindergarten, or the 4K class that's here used to be in a community site, so when the school was built, we didn't have either of the 4K sites here in the building, which we now have one of the section one, two of the sections, but one full day classroom being used for that. So, like I said, just even if we just stay where we're at right now with our 22 students per grade level, can we keep moving that up to 24, 25? Yes, we absolutely can. At some point, I think as a parent in the district, you have to make a decision for how many kids do I want in my student's classroom? Do I want 26? Do I want 28? That's not, like Amanda said, that's not ideal at this point. It's just, we could take some tours of what the classrooms look like now. It's just continuing to put desks in classrooms and then students not getting, the one-on-one and small group help that we could be getting. But really, this plan is really about projecting out into the future. We would not be hiring teachers until that need was there, because you wouldn't have the budget for that until you had the students that would offset
Do
it.
we know what the surrounding schools' average class sizes are? And how many, one more question, how many are in IEPs and 501 plans and special ed, where they actually get pulled out of their classroom and do get one-on-one attention by specialty staff?
Well, so kind of addressing two things. One, I'd have to look. I know a lot of the school districts that are surrounding us have similarly sized. I can't speak for Watertown, but some of the neighbors I'd say are pretty close to that. Number two is fundamentally, if a student has an IEP, they are part of the regular core education class. I am a mother of a child who had an IEP. Never did I want them to say, you're not part of that. I get emotional right away on that. You are part of that core class, and you have a desk in that class. Just like any other intervention, you might be pulled out for a half hour and you're back in to get help, but as you need it, you are fundamentally part of this class. They're always included in our core classrooms. And when we do have students with IEPs and 504 plans, they need additional help in the classroom. So a lot of times our teachers are pushing into the classroom, so now you're adding another adult that's also in that classroom. You have a child that has additional needs. That puts a little extra burden on the regular classroom teacher because that aide is not with them 100% of the time. So once again, if you have a class size of 24, 25, and you have 3 students in there with an IEP, I'm certain not all of those needs are being met. I was a teacher for a long time in a classroom, and yeah, that's.
So what was, when this school was built, what was the capacity, this classroom capacity built for?
24 students.
24 students, and we did, the class, the senior class that graduated last year was one of those larger classes, so they did have, I think at times like 25 students in the class. It was a bubble class that went through, so there were some very large classrooms. They were actually, that's when they were here, Prospect Elementary, they weren't here. So when I looked back at our class sizes for the last 5 years, I would say on average we're about 22. That really has not, it'll fluctuate 21, 22, 23, up to 24, but I'd say on average it stayed right about 22. So going back again and looking at, are we out of space? I can stick, child number 23, 24 in some of the classrooms, but we still, like I said, have 2 sections of 4K still off-site, and we are still educating kids in classroom spaces that probably shouldn't really be used as classroom spaces, even to the point we've moved, some of like Aaron, our building principal, into different spaces that are not offices to be able to create small group spaces for students. So I mean, yeah, we could continue to add students, for a while. I think when we get to that point where we're looking at child 24.
All of the trouble and challenges you just stated, was that caused because of that blockade right here, was it landing here in the beginning?
I don't know. I mean, I think at this point, the district really didn't have an option with that 4K class. We also know that it's better programming when we have all of our students with us in one building. I know, Aaron does try to get over to the Methodist Church and supervise what's going on, with instruction and things like that, but it's almost like a whole disconnected section of kids that are off-site. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll continue to grow.
So our schools are K through 12. That's mandatory school
Correct. Yep.
teaching. 4K didn't used to be here, correct?
Right. 4K wasn't in Wisconsin until about 2000.
4K did not used to be in this building, correct?
Correct.
And to your point, if 4K was moved back to where they originally were, because our schools should only be, not should only be, but K through 12 is the mandatory school grades that you provide. If this 4K had to go back to another location, is that going to be?
It's still a cost factor though. So you still, so there's 2 options for 4K. And then that can go in depth at a different time, because there's 2 options for 4K. You either run a community-wide site, you have no control over the teachers, the curriculum, anything that goes on in those 4K sites, but we as a district are still required to pay for that as a community site. Our site at the Methodist Church is run by us, so we rent space from the Methodist Church. So if we move that 4K site out of here, we're still incurring yearly costs to have to pay for the rental of that site. So
But not $50 million.
it's about $40,000 a year. So you add that up over
It's
time.
already incorporated into our taxes, correct? This is
Sorry.
already incorporated into our taxes, correct? It's not additional, it's already incorporated into our taxes currently. So that's only the 4K funding.
Community sites, that's ideal. I'm not sure if that's really, the best for all, if we got, rentals around the community because we are out of space already with our own buildings. So like I said, there's a difference between a community site that's actually run by a child care that you don't have any jurisdiction over, and then you're still paying that site, and also just renting space in your community to be able to house a
the
Yes.
wraparound care, the big program is school that each generate, income generating, you can see that St. Paul's, you have to pay extra. And I know on the slide it said for the after school care now, the hours more that the families pay for it, they got families with the wraparound care, pay for their families as well for that additional time.
Oh, yeah, 4K wraparound, that's run through our rec program, just like the after, before and after school program now. Families pay for that, so it's kind of a break even.
So if you created rents in another building, so you do everything together, but then it also allows you to provide complete wraparound care and generate income that.
If we did it here or this
So
way.
if you went to a different
A
site,
different-
site where you could fit all
Yeah.
4K, and then you could also offer that wraparound care that we currently can't, you'd be able to generate income from that site.
If there was sites available in town, there's just not sites.
One of the reasons people want it, you might know more than I do, is, possibly you might be a mother or something, but in Madison, where I lived for a long time, and I worked with state budgets and things, but this wasn't my area, but Madison was one of the last communities to adopt 4K, and people were, and one of the reasons they wanted it was essentially that they thought, they were shocked that it wasn't free and it wasn't all day when it was adopted, because they thought they were going to save money on childcare. So that becomes a kind of a complicated conversation about what is the, I don't know, what are the finances against why do people want it. They're hoping to save money over having to
You still
pay to
will.
send them
You save
somewhere,
money.
but it's not free.
Yeah.
So,
Well, right, but
yeah.
as a parent, I realize,
Yeah.
I know that, but I still would save money, because
Yeah.
daycare all day is much more
Yeah.
expensive than daycare half a day, so I'm still saving.
Yeah.
So,
I remember Channel 3 did a
Move
story.
aside, because I know we didn't even
about
get to the
shock parents.
financial part of this, which is probably some of the key in 1996. So this is district-owned land. It's advantageous to the district because we're not looking to purchase a site in addition to building a school. So this is land that we already own.
So where is the site? The site is on the south side of town. You'll see Highway 89 running along the left-hand side of the screen. The property is directly north of the existing St. Paul's Lutheran Church, and the outline of the property is kind of that dark black line. The site plan that we're showing is nothing more than what fits on the site. It's not fully engineered, it's not fully designed, the building is not fully designed. What we're purely trying to show is what size the footprint of the school takes up, and what we're trying to imply is that we want to make sure that wherever the school is located, it has room to grow on each end of the building, and it includes a future addition. If you remember back, I talked about the possible need that the elementary school would get to within capacity at the end of those enrollment projections. What that means is that the second grade could move into this facility in the future, alleviating the pressure of enrollment at this building and moving those second graders out into this facility. Again, building a fourth building, but it would allow for future additions to alleviate any of the future enrollment constraints on the district in the future. At 33.5 acres, that's a nice sized site. That's a very comfortably sized site. The advantage of a site of that size is that all of the parent pickup, I'm amazed parents, get in line 45 minutes before school is let up. That can be several hundred cars in a line waiting for school to be released. This site would allow for all of those cars to be parked in a line on the property. That's huge. That's
going back to my premise that although they do it for all those grades, they do it mostly for the under.
right, and it's always at the end of the day. Well,
Well,
some of those parents will be here, but this building will be a smaller capacity. So there'll be less parents in line at this facility. This was never designed to have several hundred cars
I agree.
in a line.
I agree. That's why I'm wondering why not, I understand that you guys have a lot there to the solutions, but that's one point that disconnects for me. I feel like if what you were trying to do was build a youngest ages facility that facilitates current parental pickup practices, you would put it there.
And it would cost significantly more.
Right,
to do
but
that.
again, if you're assuming, I mean, some of these things is like, you didn't ever give the public the opportunity to ask about which things they would prefer to pay for or something, you know? I think that maybe we should have had 2 or 3 alternatives at least for discussion, as opposed to.
Well, let's return to that after we see what this
I agree
costs.
with what you're saying, but you're making an argument that a different grade belongs to that side.
Sir, you can make your point. Let's
Yeah.
just listen to the proposal. We might even agree with you, but let's just get through the presentation, okay?
So with this site, there are a few things that are known. We know that there are going to be some type of intersection improvements to Highway 89 and Unshaven Lane. We know that Unshaven Lane is going to get constructed, and at some point, the city has a great deal of interest in extending Unshaven Lane and connecting it up to CP. What that looks like, the city is looking at grants to be able to do that. Until the school would pass a referendum, there are going to be no more conversations about that because the city wants to know that a school is going to be on this site. So that future connection is largely dependent on a school actually being constructed at this location. The sidewalk has a grant to be extended. Again, that would happen if a school was constructed there. And the bike path would be connected with whatever those sidewalks are once they're constructed for student access. So in summary, this site, not the final design, nothing more than just showing what fits, would serve grades 3 through 5 with a future addition to be able to be grades 2 through 5. It would have 7 classrooms per grade initially, with the opportunity to have at least 8 classrooms per grade in the future. It's district-owned property, future expansion. All of the core spaces, like the gymnasium like this, would be sized for those future additions. The cafeteria would be sized for the future additions. It's a separate bus and parent loop, creating safety. And finally, there's room for future development. What that means, we're not sure, but there's at least room for the district to construct something on this property, should it be needed. With all of this comes costs. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Peter, who's been waiting patiently to explain how the costs were created.
Thanks, Eric. I'll take the clicker too. Maybe it's this one. Thanks, Eric. So everybody, my name is Peter with Findorf. We're the construction manager working with the district on this project. In short, what the construction manager does is we manage the construction project from beginning to end. So why are we here tonight? Well, because what we do is we work with architects and districts from the very beginnings, even before something goes to referendum, to inform on what a budget might be for a school you might be thinking about. And so what does that mean? We're doing something called a preliminary budget estimate. And so what we like to do is kind of explain what that is before we show the numbers. A preliminary budget estimate is based on a concept idea. So Eric kept reiterating that picture, some of you are holding it right now, that orange rectangle. We know what that rectangle is. We know how many square feet it is. We know how many classrooms are probably going to be in it. We have some very good knowledge on that. So it's based on a conceptual scope, not estimated like a perfect scope, right? It's based on an estimated square footage, and also it's consistent of similar projects. So Findorf's been doing a lot of work in the area in Wisconsin, especially in the K-12 markets, and we've been doing a lot of work with EUA. So we have a good understanding of what schools cost, specifically schools built by EUA, and specifically schools of this size. I just finished one of these 2 years ago, so it gives us really good data to work off of historically. It's also, these include some inflation projections. We'll get into that a little bit more. It assumes bidding, so we would put this out to bid for contractors to bid on, that the bidding would start in January of 24, because that's when you're buying it. You don't buy it today. We have to assume that you're buying it in 2024 when we bid it. And the last thing is it's comprehensive of the total project cost, which includes the materials, installation, fees, and also the contingencies that are needed for the project. What it doesn't include is any sort of operational or the operational part of it, which is what Tasha will bring up in just a minute. So right now, what we're looking at for the school, for the new school, we're looking at a range, and I'll explain that range in a minute, of $38 to $41 million. We know there'll be some road work that's required. We don't know exactly what that is. Something having to do with Unshaven and the intersection you saw in the picture that Eric shared is Unshaven have to get larger for all the traffic coming in and out of there. Some sort of intersection change on 89 and Unshaven. We know there'll be some utilities coming in there. We've been working with the city of Lake Mills, Tanya has been, with what they might require. So we have some ideas of what those costs might be. And we also recognize there's going to be some small costs here at this school just to tweak a few small things as they get ready for the smaller grades. Now, if you're looking at this, the total range is 42 to 44 million. How many people got the handouts that have been going out over the last month or two? A couple of you, yes? So you're probably, if you were paying attention to those, Peter, it used to be 33 to 36. Some things, yes, I asked the same question once we started estimating it, right? So as we start to look at these numbers, there's two contributing factors to that. And I think it goes without saying everything going on in just the world today and what we're seeing. Whether you go to Culver's or you're buying a house or you go to Menards, everything's more expensive. It's not as simple as that though. So the construction industry is seeing the same things, the same issues that we're seeing all over the place. And it's really predominantly related to three things, which have some minor things. With market volatility, with cost escalation, we're seeing supply chain issues, where things are coming and going, what is actually available for these schools, what's actually available for construction, and then lastly, labor shortages and the escalating costs that are associated with that. Now, when we look at a range, what I try to do is when I explain this to go, and if you watched online or were there, we talked about it at noon today, is what has happened since we gave the first number to now, and what do we think is going to happen from now until January 2024 if there's a successful referendum and it goes to bid? Well, what's happened in the last 6 to 8 months is unprecedented. As we plan these schools, and we've done dozens and dozens of these schools, we assume some sort of inflation and some rising costs, and I don't think we've ever had any issues with costs, ever. So when we look at it, we say, we'll think 3 to 4, sometimes 5% based on what we know. Over the last 2 years, we have seen we have seen a steady rate of 8 to 10% and higher in some indices when you look at the inflation rates across construction materials. So that seems like a lot. That's kind of crazy. Let me give you an example. We were just estimating a week ago. We got 3 bids in for ceiling tile. How many people have seen those square things in the ceiling? It's just little 2x2 or 2x4 ceiling tile. It's like a given in the construction industry. If you want to guess what that is, you just take this home. It would be really good. $5 a square foot will buy you a ceiling tile all day long, forever. Last week we got 3 bids for 10. No one saw that coming. We couldn't explain it. We're trying to understand it. We're in a more difficult conversation explaining it to a district and owners. Say, hey, this is where the prices are coming in. We didn't know. So there is what brought us from there to now is those 3 items there. So now we look ahead and say, what's going to happen from now to January 24th? Well, we could make a couple of assumptions. We could say, hey, look, inflation's going to stay 3 to 4 to 5%. What we thought we know is probably just like all of you thought you knew is out the window, right? We have no idea what's going to happen in the next 2 years. But it could be 3 to 5%. It could be 8 to 10%. And that's where you're seeing the difference in the range of the 42 to 44 million. It's what's the inflation? What might it be? And so as we're working with the district and with EUA and the administrative team, we're saying, let's leave the range for now where we're saying it. And usually at this time, we start to think of if you're going to go to referendum and if we put a number out there with the team, we all work together, this is the number we'd like to go for. I think there's a number they're going to use for calculations. But we would say, right now, let's keep the range where it is and let's see where things happen over the next 3 to 4 months and then pick a number that that we would go to referendum with. So that's the cost as far as the overall cost of the project. That explains how we kind of got to where we were to now and where we might be projecting. But really, this is only part of the cost scenario because how much does this mean to you and to your taxes? And that's what Tasha's going to say to you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to cover next year a little bit about the impact that you might see on your taxes. So I think Tanya may have mentioned earlier that we work with R.W. Baird as our financial advisor. And so in partnership with them, we've made some key financial planning assumptions and provided it, and we came up with this table that you see before you. So one of those assumptions is going to be a 4.75 interest rate. And then for question one, we're looking at the cost of the building construction, as Peter had gone over, and not to exceed 44 million is the number we're looking at. And then in addition to that, we're looking at another question, which is an operating referendum of $950,000 per year. And I'll get into more details of that shortly. So this table also is going to provide 3 different lines of property value, ranging between 100 and 300,000. And those figures are really just used as samples for easy calculation of property values. So question one, the not to exceed 44 million for the construction of the building would be calculate to 68 cents per $1,000 of property value. So what does that mean? If you follow the first line across at the $100,000 of property value, it turns out to be $68 per year and $5.67 per month on that 44 million. Next line down, 200,000 of property value, 136 annually, and $11.33 on a monthly basis. If we shift over to question 2, which is in a darker blue, we would talk about the operating referendum. So I'd like to point out that the last 2 referendums that we've had did not include an operating referendum. They were replacement buildings or to improve a building. So they did not, there was not going to be any incurred additional cost to operating that actual building. So what is that $950,000 made up of? So primarily it's made up of staffing. So there's current staffing that would move with the grade levels that would move from the different buildings, those teachers that we already have. But there are positions that would need to also be hired additionally. Office staff, the maintenance staff, custodial staff, food service staff, counselor. There'll be some shared positions between the buildings, but we will have additional costs there too. So that's primarily what that's made up of. It also includes utilities, and as Peter was kind of talking about inflation, obviously we all know, we've seen in our bills at home, there are increases in those costs as well. Technology, every building has a technology budget, so that would be added as in addition to that. So that's kind of an idea of what that is made up of, a quick little rundown of that. So the impact that that piece would have, that question would have, is the 72 cents per $1,000 of property value. And again, as you run across the lines and work down the table, you can see how that impacts taxes on an annual or per month basis. So overall, if you add those together, the combined property tax increase on the mill rate would be $1.40 per $1,000 of property value. And that's just adding those, that 68 cents and that 72 cents together. So that is kind of a quick rundown of what the impact could be on taxes if this referendum were to pass.
How long ago was that done, and where did you get property values from?
The property values are just sample property values.
Where's hardly anything wrong with it?
And again, they're just really used as an example, so you can kind of figure that into maybe what that would look like. This was made probably last week, I'd say. So whatever's happened last week. Again, yep, these numbers are based on those assumptions. So then next, we're going to talk about timeline.
So what happens after a possible November election? So the election would be on November 8th. If the referendum were successful, it takes about a year to talk to staff, design the building, engineer the building, and engineer the site. So the first 12 months is largely engaging staff and designing the building to fit the staff and the teachers' needs. From there, it then goes to public bidding for contractors.
Yeah, so if it's 12 months, that would put us in December, January of 23-24 range to start bidding, with the goal to start construction in roughly April, May. Once the ground starts to soften up, you can start digging. April, May of 2024, and the school would be completed around June, July of 2025. And the goal is that there'd be a month to a month and a half at the end, where the school district then could move from building to building, because they're coming out of 2 buildings into this one and moving things around. And so there's significant work that has to happen in that last month and a half.
So the next question that we often get is, what were the ideas that were not advanced? And I think a couple of them have come up tonight. I'll read kind of from left to right across the top of the screen. So the first idea was, well, what if we build a 4K through 2 school out on that south property? This building would be converted to serve grades 3 through 5, and then the existing middle school would be remodeled to serve grades 6 through 8. So somebody talked about that option. Well, why wasn't that promoted, or why wasn't that advanced? This building is really best suited for those younger grades. So it makes no sense to move the youngest grades out of this building from a building that it's really well designed for. This existing elementary site is small. For 5th grade activities outside, it's a really tight site. It's not prudent to invest that much remodeling into this building, and the overall idea ended up being significantly more expensive. The next idea was, okay, let's build that primary school, that 4K through 2, out at the district-owned property, but we just won't do any remodeling here, and we won't do any remodeling at the middle school. Well, the reasons that wasn't advanced was really the same thing. That this building's best suited for the younger grades, the site's small, and it still ended up being more expensive than the option that we're talking about tonight. Another idea, and this came up at the senior center today, somebody asked, why don't you just have 2 sister elementary schools in the district? So you split the enrollment, you split Lake Mills into a north and a south at the elementary level. So, there'll be some street where some kids go to one elementary school, and the other side of the street, kids will go to the other elementary school. That's done in some districts, and it works really well in some districts, but typically those are bigger districts. With that idea, this elementary would convert to 4K through 5, so again, bringing 5th grade into this building, so you'd have 2 kind of sister 4K through 5 schools, and the existing middle school would again be converted into 6 through 8. When we talked about that at a deeper level, the feeling was Lake Mills is maybe too small, maybe too neighborly to be dividing the elementary students at that age and then expecting them to all come together at the middle school level, and it created a lot of programming challenges for the staff who'd be serving those 2 elementary schools at different locations. Another idea that was discussed was taking the existing district office, maybe converting that building into something for the high school, and moving the district office services into whatever the new building would be. That wasn't moved ahead because it wasn't a high priority at the time. And finally, investigating other land. Some people don't like the property on the south side of town. What other land is available? Well, we talked to the city, we got an understanding of what's available that's size appropriate, what's available within district limits, and what has utilities available for it and roads available for it. And there weren't really any better properties than what the district owns already. Plus, the district owns that land already, so you're not having to pay several $1 million to buy another property. So those are some of the ideas that were not advanced, but that people were asking about. Do we want to open this up to the whole audience?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so for that last half of the presentation, what questions do you have about the site or costs?
Expansion of CPO. We've been at city meetings where Mr. Wilkie referred to there being costs put on the property owners there, which would be the school district. And if the costs from extending CPO was put onto the school district, would that not additionally raise taxes on the community?
Those costs are already in the cost estimates. The district is going to have to, the district is sort of thought of as a developer by the city for those roads. They can't assess the school district like you can a business. So the district is providing funds to the city to build those road improvements.
And how does, once, so CP is open, and traffic can go that way as well?
If something is constructed.
Right, so, right. How is, looking at CPM, I have trouble seeing how that, the way that road is constructed right now is a really good means to pull traffic away from the south end of town. And I don't see how that, the CPM itself, whether that will need to be redone along with this as well, and CP will run down by Crystal Farms into a T intersection, which is not a good route out to the north end of town. I mean,
And those are great questions for the city. I mean, this, you know, it was interesting when we met with the city and we met with the DOT. The city says, hey, the city builds roads. The school district doesn't build roads. You know, let us, the city, worry about that.
Objective in your presentation, as far as the school, that's one piece. But along with that, and you may not be able to answer it because of your school, but there are going to be additional costs in Highway 80 intersection with 89, the infrastructure because of traffic now along.
Right, and the city is looking to assess the developers who develop kind of east of the school site.
And I guess when I think of 89, there's a lot of heavy trucking along that road. You know, I understood what you said, there's other properties that, you know, own, the school owns the land, but, you know, there's a concern that trucks and busy highway.
Right, and it was interesting when we were meeting with the DOT, the DOT said, you know, we want to understand what the improvements are going to be to the road, to the intersection. So the city is working with the DOT to figure out what those improvements would be. The school district is contributing dollars to whatever improvements that'll be. And then even the idea of lowering the speed limit at that location was discussed, and the DOT said, you know, we'll talk about that when we know there's a school being built there.
and I guess it goes beyond the value of the school district and all that. Career and education, and I see all that. But there's also other pieces going on in the community that could affect this referendum, such as the city's talking about a new wastewater plant, the city's talking about doing a multi-billion-dollar restaurant build down at Sandy Beach and then leasing it back to, you know, so not saying something isn't valuable, but the community may be having to look at multiple issues at the same time, and that's where some of their feeling may come from.
Yeah, and it's always challenging for school districts because you get a say yes or no for a school project, you don't get a yes or no say for a city project.
If more people attend meetings, we may.
That's the hope, yes.
I have a question on your tax impact. You rolled out a 20-year payment on this thing. When you buy a house, you don't do a 20-year payout. Can you extend that to a 30-year payout and change that tax structure? Is it possible? You understand what I'm saying?
20 years.
State law.
No, it's,
State law limits you to 20 years?
Yeah.
I think it's a law, but the finance committee, the bond finance people, the bear company, they think in terms of 20-year financing for things. In my limited experience, Charlie, with financing some transportation projects, there is sometimes flexibility in how much you front load and how much you back load,
Right.
which can affect the tax impact, and if that was an important consideration. But for some reason, they feel like 20-year bonds are the easiest to sell. But
There is
chances
a
are
state
that-
law for school finance that limits borrowings for 20 years, the maximum borrowing. But what districts do is they can stagger it a little
Yeah.
bit by having more than one borrowing, for example.
Yeah.
So that
As
then
some
they can
other-
refinance, which
Yeah.
is what Lake Mills has
Right.
done. But you can't borrow for 30 years. The max is 20.
Okay,
And
that
the
answers
other
my
piece
question.
of the two borrowings is we wouldn't necessarily need all the money right away.
Here in
I'll
Lake
just kind of
Mills,
go
you mean, or
off
other?
that.
Oh, I think it's been fairly close in Lake Mills.
The elementary school was close, maybe like 54% passage. We weren't involved in the middle school, so I don't remember what that was. The high school was significantly higher. That was like 60 or 62% passage.
Well, there were two questions.
Two questions, right. One was the school and the other was the field. Yep.
I think that was a little closer.
Yep. The school was a higher passage rate than the field was. Yep.
So this makes sense of how sensitive you've been to cost considerations. That's why I was wondering.
Yep. 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 Correct. And I think the intent, according to the city, the intent is there would be a shared cost.
And they knew that when that was constructed.
That there would be a shared cost between the school district and the church for the construction of unsafe lane.
I'm just thinking about the number of cars that there are that are going to be using up the whole schools using the same road.
Right. Yeah, and that extension to CP, I think that's why the city is so interested in having that done.
We started discussions with St. Paul's about staggered start times. That unsafe road will not look like it, I mean, it's not even a road right now, it's just an outlet. And St. Paul's is, for the blacktop portion, so that road will look significantly different, but like I said, I talked with Steve as much as possible. We've talked about, shared busing and staggering. We know we don't want 500 people coming in on the same street at, 8 o'clock in the morning. I mean, all of our start and end times in the district would all be staggered to allow the buses to get to each school. We know parents already have, children in each one of the 3 schools. I mean, I see the traffic downtown at 8 o'clock. You probably get to witness that firsthand. So that is first and foremost in our mind, as well as not adding to the congestion. I think part of the nice thing about taking some of the kids off of this site and into a new site is it would probably force us to bus quite a few more kids out there, which I think will alleviate what we're seeing as far as traffic here and traffic up and down the 89 corridor, because you would have so much parent traffic up and down.
Mentioning traffic and having businesses downtown. Has there been discussion, because in certain areas, how to increase traffic from the south end into a downtown that's already lined up at that time of day? Have there been discussions, we haven't got anything from the city on that, have there been discussions of what that whole traffic situation is to look? I mean, are they looking at how do you handle all that coming into the downtown when it's already lined up significantly with school traffic?
So the school district worked with a traffic consultant to do what's called a first phase study. And that first phase study looked at how much traffic would the school create, what type of traffic is at St. Paul's, and what type of traffic is associated with the developments. The second phase of the traffic study, which the city would be paying for and conducting, which would happen after a school district or after a referendum is successful, would then look at, now that we have all of those traffic counts, what is the road infrastructure solution to satisfy those traffic counts?
But coming north, you pick up 2 high schools along the way.
Right. Yep.
Or those high schools are going to send traffic out to the south end, where you're going to have this new traffic congestion.
Right.
With the new school and St. Paul.
And this is kind of a unique site because the DOT controls that intersection of 89 and Unshaven. The Unshaven lane would be a city road, but the intersection is governed by the DOT because it's a state highway.
In your discussion with the city, is a portion of that expense going off to the school, to the property owner, or does the expense of that road reconstruction go on to that? I guess what I'm saying is, are we going to look at another potential increase through the city because they're
talking specifically on Saban?
Yes.
I know the one thing we just don't have the information yet is, I know the city is looking at various grants to help with the construction of specifically CP. We won't know about any of that until the end of May to see if they will receive that grant. Because again, we're trying to take the burden off of us as far as any type of construction. And I know people don't want to pay more in taxes as well, so we're looking at, are there federal grants out there for infrastructure that would just offset those costs? So as far as I know, the city will hear about that towards the end of May. So I would see like some of our plan even evolving, if we do get word like, yes, that's gonna pay for it, that takes, some burden off of us as well. If no, they don't get the grant, then we still gotta go back in and plan, like, okay, well, what's the next steps then? I think some of it too depends on, we know after talking with developers that people are just kind of waiting to see what happens with the school referendum. And like it was mentioned here, if some of that does turn into housing, then the developer's a little bit more, I'm assuming, on the hook for that development. But right now, a lot of people don't want to commit to anything until something happens with the school referendum.
One final. Say the referendum passes, and then you have that year of planning, then you go to bid, and things have continued to escalate. What happens if you go to bid and referendum is underfunding? Won't do that. What happens?
That's not a good thing.
It's not a good thing. We try to avoid that. I'll first speak to how we try to avoid it. We try to avoid it right now over the next 6 months, or 3-4 months, right? We're checking in monthly. Where are we at? We don't want to go with the wrong number, because if we go the wrong number, we're in the same boat that there's a number of communities right now that just passed in November, and now they're short $9 million, and they're in trouble, right? So we're trying to avoid it, one, by checking in now. Also, as the design process happens through that year, North doesn't go back to their office. We're actually, every I think it's a couple, 2-3 weeks, we're meeting with the team. We're checking in with EUA throughout the design, looking at if it passes, and saying, here's what's being designed, here's where the costs are coming in. In some cases, there is some, what we would call value engineering, or some cost reduction that has to happen as we're going through it. That's usually the last resort, but on bid days, sometimes that is where we get to. It doesn't happen a lot, but we try to avoid that through the process of checking with regular budget updates and ensuring that what's being designed is according to the budgets and the costs that we're seeing today.
Well, and I'll pile on. The referendum dollar amount, that's a fixed number. It can't cost more than that. Once it passes, it can't cost. There isn't an opportunity for the school district to say, ooh, we need a little more. No, that's it. We have to change the design to make it less expensive to fit under that budget. Not necessarily. It's quality.
Can you repeat the question? Your question.
The statement was then they're not going to get what they need.
In the design that you laid on this paper, are you talking a 2-story building, single-story, flat surface? I mean, because there's a difference in cost construction between those two.
Depends what you're looking at, which industry you're bidding from. Typically, a building of this size would be 2-story, and that's what we're assuming. A 2-story building. Well, a 2-story building is the most efficient way. Right. The grades are stacked, so the from 3rd grade to 4th grade, it's kind of a similar footprint, so it makes sense to stack those. It's less roof to have to re-roof in the future, so it's from an operational standpoint, it's more efficient, and from an energy efficiency standpoint, you lose all of your energy through the roof. If you have a smaller roof, it's just a naturally more energy efficient building, much like this one.
Yeah, when we're starting early phases, talking budgets and estimates, really not looking ahead at like future maintenance costs, they can be very similar because a 2-story building would have less concrete at the bottom, but it has more steel going up. It also has more windows going up. These are cost items, but it also has less square feet in roof. So I'm not going to say it's way less expensive, but I would say they're comparable enough that we've done a lot of these. At this stage of the game, we could say they're pretty close. So it's more about the future than.
I had a question like an hour ago. Yeah.
That's definitely a decision the school board is gonna have to make in August, so you're right, I mean, we already did wait too, because we thought we were gonna go in April. There was definitely a lot more work to do and a lot of other communication and questions to answer. Yes, I would look at that again. I mean, if for some reason through the summer months, we see that the construction market is still ridiculously volatile, and all of a sudden we come back in August, and like, oh, now it's 50 million. I mean, I think there has to be a breaking point of like, this doesn't make sense right now. I can tell you, and Peter could probably tell better than me, but just watching schools that have been built in the last several years in the area, it never gets any cheaper, so even if we don't do this now, it never comes down in price. So, you know, if it's 36 to 44.
Not as low as it was, but it spikes. It's
So, right, I mean, you have had the market crashes, but we haven't, I mean, Peter, you could probably talk to that.
It's coming, it's because this is all man-made, it's the policies, yeah, inflation, it could be
Right.
controlled better, and with different, well, doing different things on the federal level, but, you know, just to assume that it's not gonna go higher than, say, 6%, so we're fine, it's foolish, because it's going to keep going. I mean, if you listen to anything, as far as financial markets, on a daily basis,
And that's why we're having the conversations now. I mean, it's not, the board hasn't taken action, so we've got through the fall months. And Peter is actually watching the costs monthly, so I mean, we're not saying like, yep, we're going in and it's this dollar amount no matter what, but it's like, we've got a lot of time. If we get to fall and it's like, yeah, there's no way, you know, interest rates are up to 8%, now the costs are up here, we're not pushing this thing through regardless. Then it's like, some common sense has to kick in and, yeah, this doesn't make sense right now.
operations, you aren't thinking, well, maybe we have to put this off for like 18 months. And so we need to do that as far as operational.
When you say operationally, you say the $950,000 portion of it?
Just wait, instead of, you know, referendum this fall. I'm not asking this, I'm just asking, have you thought about, you know, what if we can't afford it, really?
Right.
After 12, 18 months before things start coming down, are you prepared to, continue operating in this current?
I think we are. I think it goes back to Pat's question is, if at some point, I don't, if it looks like the market is continuing to increase, I don't want the board to have to vote on a referendum dollar amount that gets passed in November when we're seeing a trend that it's increasing. That doesn't make sense, because once we're locked into that number, we're locked in. And going back to your point, I don't want to have to backpedal, and it's like, well, now we can't, because we don't have fluff built into this plan. It's not like, oh, now we can't build the auditorium, or we can't build this. This is just an elementary school for the most part. So there's not things that can get cut off if we run out of money. So I think that's why, along with our financial advisors, we're watching things very closely. We're doing these listening sessions too to make sure, like, what are you guys, you know, hearing and seeing? What are your wants? And like I said, nothing is set in stone. At this point, we will continue to listen through the summer months. It could go the other way too. We talk about like, is some of the construction at the breaking point? At what time, at what point is it like the market has to come back down? That could happen in fall too, and we could be on the winning end of it. And it's like, hey, now we're not asking 44 million because it shifted, and maybe now it's down to 39. Yes, they're right. They are in constant communication, and they do budget on an interest rate on the conservative side, because they also know too that they don't want to go in and have a school district, you know, short. So that's why we updated the numbers too, because the original figures were figured out about a 3.5% interest rate, and these are at 4.75. So like I said, we will watch the trend throughout the fall, and like I said, you got to do what makes sense too, right? It's like building your own house. And sometimes it's like you just got to wait. It doesn't make sense now. It doesn't make sense now. So just don't want anybody coming back in like 3 years and saying like, well, now it's 50 million, you could have built that school for 40, why didn't you do it back then? So mark my words on that one.
The gentleman back there has a question.
Oh, yes, Paul.
I had a question about question 2, Tasha, that 950,000. What's the cost of living for raises, salaries, benefits, things like that? Have you factored it into that?
Yes.
And how long will it last? Is it a 20-year thing, or is it going to be in perpetuity?
You know, I would probably have to go back and do some, how long it would last would, I think we would probably, I would have to go back, but it would be.
It'd be a bit earlier.
The plan was to do a recurring one, unending to pay for the cost.
But I think your question is, with inflation as it goes throughout the years, right, how long will that no longer be enough? Is that kind of your question?
Right. When will it be beyond 950?
And without going through and doing some calculations on the average CPI throughout the years, I wouldn't feel confident just answering that without getting my computer out and pulling some numbers and diving into it, but it's a valid question.
The only thing I would add is if the enrollment does increase and then, you know, those additional spaces get filled up, then that does offset with the state budget. So it helps equalize that. If for some reason enrollment didn't change, then, I mean, yeah, right now we have factored in those costs. So it kind of goes hand in hand depending on the state budget as well. We never know every 2 years what we're getting as far as, you know, state funding. What? We got no state, no increase this year. They're saying no increase next year. So we've had no new monies for 2 years, which has been tough on every school district. The gubernatorial election, as you know, then things all shift again. I think that's what everybody's waiting for. We don't know which way that'll go.
And 2 I wanted to tell you too, Paul, when you're talking about raises too, there's gonna be teachers retiring out and new teachers coming in, and the ones retiring are gonna be at topper scale and lower, so that kind of offsets a little bit when you're talking about raises and stuff. But, my comment is more of if something's been considered in regards to, you put a school out there, it's next to St. Paul's. St. Paul's planning to add, to expand their 4K now. And I had a conversation as well, and they said, you know, I do think the school might be good for increasing our early childhood numbers. And as a parent, driving through town is a little, you know, it's one stop. You know, are you worried that putting a school right next to a wraparound 4K already program that's well established is going to go from our program, and then parents are going to go there, drop off, go right off at 89 to work at Madison? You know, kind of might, putting a school next to them might take away from our 4K due to convenience.
I mean, it's, I think, you know, right now it's pretty convenient for parents already. I think it would be a difference if we were building a 4K2 school out there where you'd have two kind of similar sites where.
If I have like a 3rd grader and a 4-year-old,
Oh, that, okay, I see what you're saying
Yeah.
now. It's interesting because what I probably see as a trend is typically parents have kids about 2 years apart. So it tends to be like, if I've got a 4K-er, I've probably got a 1st grader. And so what we've seen is probably more of the parents wanting the 4K on site because then it is a one-stop drop. So I'm dropping off my 4K-er, I'm also dropping off my 1st or 2nd grader. Usually we don't, it's not every family, but you don't always see kind of those grade spans where the 3rd, 4th, and 5th would affect sometimes the 4K. I mean, that's not true all the time. But parents, I mean, from what I've seen, you know, the convenience is a big factor. Everybody's working, so the intermediate school, I don't necessarily
That was just
see
the comment,
that.
like, oh, it might be good for us. It
Yeah.
might be one for us. He said the same thing with that shop, so I just wanted
Yeah.
to share that.
I think it would be
Across the street.
interesting if we had the 4K2 and we're trying to offer a wraparound and they're trying to offer a wraparound, even though it still seems like when we talk to parents, there's still not enough childcare in the community regardless, even with the sites that are open right now. So I know that's still a need.
Have you looked at all the big Miami crossings?
That actually came up before I started, where I think that the district was talking about, so she asked about the land across the interstate. I think some of the concerns that come up is, you talk about transportation out to our site on 89. Well, now you're trying to go across the interstate with kids riding bikes or things like that. So, I think there's a little bit of more of a danger factor going across on the other side. Plus, from what I've heard, and you guys probably know better than I do, the utilities and the water to get across the interstate have what's been kind of preventing any of the bigger development from happening so far. So Peter already talked about it's a little bit of an expense even getting those utilities out to a portion that's annexed to the city.
Yeah, I mean,
They're going under the interstate, so it's,
a school of the size that we're talking about, it doesn't really function with a well in the septic field. And it would have to be it'd have to be sprinklered, so you'd have to have this enormous holding tank for fire prevention, and that doesn't really work.
but you're right, I mean, those are all things that we did think about, like, what about this, what about that?
Stick it out there.
I suppose we got, a couple of wrap-up slides, and then, so real quickly, I'm just gonna take a minute for this. The one thing, regardless of differences, I think the one thing we can agree on is when we got the survey results back, people do have pride in the school district, thinking that they're doing a great job. Our high school seniors do graduate college and career ready. They've been very successful on the college front. They've been successful with careers if they've gone straight into the workforce. 82% believe that we're doing a good job keeping people informed. We do try to get things in the paper, social media, direct mailings, just depending on how people like to receive communication. And then 75 believe that the district helps to build pride in the community, and we know there's a lot of pride here. So some of that data we talked about already. So obviously we've had a lot of parents that said, yeah, we would support a referendum. We've had people that are non-parents going to be like, we've got some questions yet. We're worried about our taxes. When we projected out, school perception said you could probably go for referendum in April. It's going to be close. That really wasn't the complete reason why we did move forward. We just got a lot of feedback on the survey and just felt like we need to do a lot more communication. We need to do a lot more work. So we just, again, going back to your question, put a little pause on it, didn't want to plow forward, and we're really thankful that we did because we want to proceed with construction costs right now. All right, just a real quick recap. You should have gotten this flyer in your mail. It was a direct mail 2 weeks ago. If you're not getting things from the district in the mail, like your survey last fall or things like that, please contact Megan Larrabee. We can always direct mail things, but it gets pushed out through the post office. We also have the same information on the website, but we are happy to direct mail things to those instead of bulk mail from getting missed out. And then lastly, so again, we'll bring up more communication. A lot of great questions about 4K. We've been getting a lot of that. We had about the capacity, which is why that last mailing was more about enrollment. I do have some goals to get out kind of what was the history of 4K in Lake Mills? Why has it changed over the years? Where do we think moving forward, and answering some of those questions. Also some questions about the site that have come up. We do have a website on our page, or one page dedicated to it. We keep trying to update that with more information as we get more questions and think like we got to explain this more fully. Going back again, if the board moves forward with this, the goal would be to vote on that resolution at the board meeting in August. So that needs to be set. There's a timeline that we have to abide by. That's August 30th. Most likely you would be at our regular board meeting the second Monday of August with the fall election meeting that November timeline. So right now that's the goal, but like I said, we're watching things monthly. Okay. Any other questions? Or I know it's late, but I know some of you guys want to see some classrooms.